I decided that the next morning I would treat my brown-eyed people well and my blue-eyed people badly, and I was going to be treated unfairly on the basis of a physical characteristic over which you have absolutely no control. And that's what I did.
You know, Jane, and thinking about some of the criticisms that you received, and people saying it was unethical, how could you do such a thing?
I love that. I love that you say that, because if it's unethical to do that with a little group of white children for one day, how unethical is it to do it with a whole families, a whole group of people for a lifetime, for 200 and some years? If that's too difficult for one day for a little white child, then you explain to me, somebody explain to me why it's all right to do it to a whole group of people on the basis of our ignorance. It's not on the basis of skin color. Make no mistake about this. Skin color is natural. That is absolutely, that's not the problem. The problem is ignorance, self-imposed ignorance in the American population. If I can learn this, and my third graders could learn this, then so could everybody else. But we choose not to. What was your question? I'll let you finish it. I'm sorry. Sorry.
Viewers, I'm living for this right now. So in case you're wondering, how's Destiny doing? I am just fine. I'm here with Ezra and Jane at this time. So to finish my question, you're still adamant that if third graders can learn this, all of us can learn it. What do you think our biggest hangups have been in trying to unlearn and learn how to see people for who they are?
I know what our biggest hang-up is, because it is expressed to me every time I do a speech. Some liberal, pale-faced female stands up and says, well, if they get power, aren't they going to want to treat us the way we have treated them? And I say, that's your major fear, isn't it? That they're going to want to get even with you. She said, well, I think that's what's going to happen. I really worry about that. So someone did that when I did a program at a university in Texas. And I said, well, let me see if you're right. And I said to the group, and there were about 1,500 students there. Half of them were black. I said, well, every student who considers himself or herself a member of the black race in this room, who wants to get even with all white folks, please stand. 3 young black males stood. The rest of them turned and looked at him like, are you out of your mind? I said, see? They don't want to get even with all of us. Does that make you feel better? And she said, I think it does. I said, well, now, I'm glad it does. Now, let's be honest about this. Well, every person in this room who considers himself or herself a member of what we call black race, who wants to get even with 1 or 2 white people, please stand. They all leaped to their feet, cheering and laughing and high-fiving one another. Yeah, that's the way. Just tickled to death. I said, are you still comfortable? She said, well, no, I'm not. I said, now you're more worried, aren't you? She said, yes, I am. I said, you know how to deal with this? Well, no. I said, here's what you do. You behave in such a way that you aren't one of the 1 or 2 they want to get even with. Does that make sense to you? And she said, I think so. And I said to the audience, does that make sense to you? And once again, all those black kids cheered and laughed and high-fived one another and tickled to death. If we could treat people not to believe in the golden rule. I don't have the right to treat you the way I want to be treated. I know that no young male wants to be treated the way I want to be treated, and neither do you as a young female want to be treated the way I want to be treated. I have to treat you the way you want to be treated. And I don't have the right to walk up to you and say, how do black people want to be treated? No, that's not what I do. I get a book, and I read about the situation, and I read about what's going on in this country and what's going on with people who don't look like me and why it's going on, and it's going on because of people who do look like me. Because we are so frightened. We know that the statistics say that within 30 years, pale faces will be a numerical minority in the United States of America. And that's why we elected a man who said, we're going to stop the immigration of brown-skinned people into this country because brown-skinned people reproduce too rapidly. He said that while he was running for the presidency. And build a wall. It's building a wall. The wall isn't completed along the southern border of the United States to keep brown-skinned people out. This is insane. What white people, what we call white people, melanemic people, don't realize is that only from 15 to 18% of the population of the earth is classified as white. Did you know that?
I had no idea.
15 to 18% of the population of the earth is classified as white. We have been in the numerical minority always. That's the way it is. We should have gotten used to it, but we don't want that to happen in this country. We need to get over it. I've got a mask that somebody sent me on which it says, get over it. And that's what we need to do. We need to get over it. And we also need to get over the idea, and they better get over this one first, of more than one race. You and I, all three of us, are members of the same race. There's only one race. It's the human race, and you and I are all members of that race. You and I are 30th to 50th cousins. That's a fact. Like it or not, I am your cousin. Smile. Now, lots of people don't smile when I say that. They don't want to be my cousin. And I understand that. I understand that perfectly. But there's only one race on the face of the earth, and we better start to realize that and to enjoy it and to appreciate one another. There's another thing we need to think about, and this isn't going to make brown-skinned women very happy. As the hole in the ozone layer gets larger, more and more sunlight is allowed to enter our environment and strike the faces and the skin of those of us who are melanemic, who don't have enough melanin in our skin to protect ourselves from the damaging rays of the sun. So pretty soon, pale-skinned women and pale-skinned males are going to say to themselves, if we want our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren to survive in this extremely sunlit world, we're going to have to find someone of color with whom to reproduce. Now, there's a fact that no one wants to talk about. Brown women don't want to give up their men. White women don't want to give up their men. Get over it, ladies. Here's the way it is. If you want your children and your I have two granddaughters who are half Saudi Arabian, half Anglo-American. I have a grandson who is married to a beautiful dark-skinned woman. I have a great-grandson who is half Hispanic and half one of me. You have to realize that I am now engaged in learning to live with, happily, a family that looks like an international family, a family that looks like, hey, it's all right. When I looked at that one that my daughter adopted, my granddaughter adopted, I said, you know, this kid is part Hispanic, you know that, don't you? She said, well, Grammy, how do you feel about that? I said, do you remember who you're talking to? She said, it's all right. And I said, it's all right. Look at him. He's beautiful. He's absolutely beautiful. And he is. But he's, as my husband would say, he's like a fart in a skillet. Now, you can take that out of this, but that's because he moves all the time. He's like this all the time. It's just absolutely the most adorable child I've ever seen in my life. And my half Saudi Arabian granddaughter is pregnant, so we're going to have another child that people say a mixed race. No, none of these kids are mixed race. Every one of these kids are mosaics. There are no mixed race children because there's only one race on the face of the earth. A mosaic is an art form that is new and unique and made of many elements. That's what children who have parents of different color groups are. They are mosaics, and mosaics are beautiful. We need to change the language. When we change the language, when we stop referring to people as white, which according to the dictionary is the color of goodness and purity, and black, which according to the dictionary is the color of evil and savagery, when we stop using those two polar opposites, we might be able to get together as human beings. We won't until we do. Words are the most powerful weapon devised by humankind. We kill people with words all day, every day, and we keep people in their place with words all day, every day. And if people would just read the book, The Myth of Race by Robert Wald Sussman, if you don't want to read the whole thing, just read the first chapter and you'd find out where this nonsense started, and then you'd say to yourself, then why are... Finally, you will say to yourself, these words, white and black for people, began in the late 14th century. If we're going to use the language of the late 14th century, we should use the communication means and the means of transportation that they used in those times. And the dress. And men can all wear knee breeches and powdered wigs. And they can walk to work. And when you want to send me a nasty letter, I'll look for smoke signals along the horizon. And I can read your smoke signals, because I can read those words, because they come out the same way every time. People, I just have no time for this kind of idiocy and for this kind of ignorance. Racism is not the #1 problem in the United States. Ignorance is the #1 problem in the United States. And it's a self-imposed ignorance. If I can learn these things by reading, so can everyone else. Am I being unreasonable? Absolutely. Am I going to keep on doing it? Yes. Because are we going to keep on pretending that white people are superior? Yes. And are we going to find out? Maybe someday we'll insist that kids get taught the book Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization. Have you read it?
I have not. Ezra, you've read that?
I've heard of it. It's on my list.
You've heard of it? It's
on
on
my
your
list,
list?
yes.
You are going to read it this weekend.
I will.
Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you are going to read it this weekend. This is an assignment. There
Oh,
will be a
okay.
test. I'm serious. If you had any idea, people don't have any idea how brilliant those people of color were in the Nile Valley. It's in Egypt. Egypt is in Africa. It is not in the Middle East. It's time to stop talking about Egypt as if it's in the Middle East. It's a country in Africa from which came the most remarkable things that we are enjoying to this day. If you get the National Geographic magazine for April of 2018 and look at the map that shows where we all came from and where those people went to populate every landmass on the face of the earth, you'll realize that without them, there'd be no me. Now, some of you are thinking, now, we'll be better off without you. But without them, there'd be no you. There would be no Donosaurus T. Rump. There would have been no JFK. These people would not have existed if those dark-skinned people had not moved without any modern technology to populate every landmass on the face of the earth. Can you imagine the amount of brilliance, the talents, the abilities that we have lost by not taking advantage of what those people knew and what their ancestors know? We have lost eons of intelligence and ability and creativity because we sold ourselves on the idea of the rightness of whiteness, and it is a lie, a flat-out lie. And the man who wrote the book, The Myth of Race, would have called it The Lie of Race, but no one would have read it, and he wouldn't have been able to find a publisher. We'll read a myth, but we don't want to read about a lie. But he should have entitled it The Lie of Race, because that's what it is. Do you have another question you want to ask me?
I do.
You have a short answer question, do you? Yes or no?
So this is going back to...
I don't have any of those answers.
I know you don't. So we'll go with the question that Ezra and I were talking about in the car. We were talking about the multi-billion-dollar industry of promoting colorism. So there are so many variations of skin bleachers, hair straighteners, products where people can put in lip fillers, enhancers. People are changing their whole identity.
Because we decide what constitutes beauty in this country. Right. And we all know that in order to be a beautiful female, you have to be tall, leggy, blonde, blue-eyed, and fair-skinned. That is a lot of barn dirt. But we sell that idea. We have been selling that idea to people for years. We have little boys, and you know some of them, little boys of color who try to bleach their skin in order to lose the color that is wrong. Their color isn't wrong. The first modern human beings who evolved on this earth looked a whole lot more like you than they did like me. And I would be your color, except that my ancestors moved farther and farther from the equator, and the farther they got from the equator, the lighter their skin, their hair, and their eyes got. It has nothing to do with intelligence. Their brains didn't get smaller, and their brains didn't get larger. Their skin changed, and our bodies adapted to the natural environment. You look at Abraham Lincoln. What do you know about Abraham Lincoln? For sure. The Republican.
That he was melanemic?
The Republican what?
That he was melanemic?
Oh, he was better than that. The Republican Party is the party of Lincoln.
Right.
Abraham Lincoln was part white, part black, and part Cherokee Indian. He was a Melungian. So you look at Abraham Lincoln, you look at his face, you look at the length of his fingers, you look at the length of his arms, you look at the length of his legs, you look at his hair. You can't possibly deny that all three of those groups of people are in that one man who represents the party, the Republican Party. If that isn't irony, I don't know what is. I think it's absolutely wonderful. And when the Republicans find that out, they're going to stop calling themselves the party of Lincoln. But you see, in the beginning, the Republican Party was in favor of people of color. It's only been recently that they have become the most racist group on the face of the earth. And now I don't mean that every Republican is a racist. Name one. I'm sorry, but you can't put this, we're going to take this out. I understand this, but we need to change the name of the Republican Party to the Republican Party, because the pubic area is the only part that Donald Trump has ever been shown any interest in. He has knocked the L out of the word Republican. You can take that out. I understand that.
Jane, we're live.
Oh, you are. I'm sorry. No, I'm not sorry. We have had 4 years of someone who was sexist, ageist, racist, ethnocentric, homophobic individual, and called himself the leader of the greatest country on the face of the earth. You cannot be all of those and express all of those attitudes and call yourself a leader of the greatest country on the face of the earth if you want it to continue to be the greatest country on the face of the earth. You cannot do that. Those two things are oxymoronic. You cannot do it.
You know, Jane, scaling back a little bit to when you were talking about...
In other words, if we could get back to...
If we could get back to the program.
I understand that. If we could just go back for a few minutes.
But there's a lot of beauty in what you said right there, in not only electing people to see and feel who we all collectively are, but someone who is not afraid of the myth of race. If we were to, you know, have somebody to try and represent us as a country, what type of qualities do you think they would have to be able to have conversations? Not just you, because you're one person, not just several anti-racism works, but what could we do as a country to shift that narrative?
We can.
Yeah.
When people are campaigning, we can listen to the words they use. And we can listen to the things that they are proposing. And we can say, wait a minute, is this going to be good for everybody? We can read Robert Reich's book, The System. Have you read it?
I've not.
Read Robert Reich's book, The System, and you will realize that this country is being run by the boys in the Business Roundtable. 196 millionaires, billionaires, trillionaires. Read the book, The System. Or there's a book right over there on the table. Will you bring me that book on the table? Or you can get it if you want to. Everybody has to read this book. I mean, they have to read it this week because it'll only take you an hour and a half and you'll never be able to forget what's in it.
Okay.
Because the man who wrote this book knows what he's talking about.
Thank you, Ezra.
Read the book on tyranny by Timothy Snyder. It is full of absolutely brilliant statements. And if you just read the chapter headings, be kind to our language. Give up the F word, young people. Be kind to our language. Be reflective if you must be armed. Be careful where you point that weapon. Remember professional ethics. Do not obey in advance. And that's what's been going on for 4 years. That's what's going on with QAnon. That's what's going on with the Proud Boys. Mothers, raise wise men instead of proud boys. I didn't raise any proud boys. I worked hard to raise wise men, and so did my father. I wasn't in... Oh, you don't need QAnon. You don't need oath keepers. We need people who follow these rules, investigate, make eye contact and small talk. Put down those little handheld devices. Turn off the television and read a book. That's another one. Establish a contribute to good causes. Or learn from peers in other countries. And here's a really important one. Listen for dangerous words. When you hear people saying words, things like, we can't let those brown-skinned people in here because brown-skinned people reproduce too rapidly, you have to remember that over half almost half the population of the United States is brown-skinned people. In fact, we are all shades of brown. My shirt is white. My hair is white. My skin is not white. I am not a white person. I am a shade of brown, and so is everybody else. And we need to get over words like, can't let those brown-skinned people in here. Another thing I'd like for us to do, stop calling this country America. America is everything from the northernmost point of Canada to the southernmost point of South America. All the people who live in all those countries are Americans. But we, in the United States of America, think that America is the 48 contiguous states, Alaska, Hawaii, and the islands off the southeastern coast of the United States. That's not all it is. What we need to do is go back to calling ourselves the United States of America, because the most important word in that title is the word united. And for 4 years, we have had somebody who has been trying to divide us. Now, we've been through the Civil War. My great-great-grandfather fought in the Civil War. I've heard about that. We don't need another Civil War. We need to refer to this country as the U.S. America, because U.S. spells us. And you and I, and we are all members of the citizenry of the United States of America. It's important that we are united and that we stay that way. We have been in danger for the last 4 years of becoming the divided states of America. Make no mistake about that. And when you read this, you'll know and then you have to read The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. And, oh Lord, and after you read that one, you absolutely must read Rich Thanks to Racism. This is absolutely a barn burner when you realize how much of our economy is we have because we practice racism on a daily basis in this country.
Racism is profitable.
Racism is a profitable enterprise. It makes a whole bunch of money and no sense at all. And if you read The System by Robert Reich, and then read Caste. And the reason I want you to read Caste is there's a whole chapter about the tentacles of caste, and it's about the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. Now, those of the people who say to me, you didn't know what you were doing, you did a terrible thing to those children. The woman who wrote the book Caste uses that as an example of how you establish a caste system. And what I did in my classroom was establish a caste system for 2 days, and I learned how to do it by living in the United States of America.
Now, Jane, I have a question actually about that. In your previous interviews, you talk about your third graders, and I think little Debbie is one of the children that you mentioned.
Yeah, Debbie.
Can you speak to how quickly the children were able to learn how to practice prejudice in that moment?
5 minutes.
Yeah.
5 minutes. I told them blue-eyed people aren't as smart as brown-eyed people. They're as clean as brown-eyed people. They aren't as civilized as brown-eyed people. And make no mistake about this. We had talked about whether we wanted to do this. And I said to them, do you have any idea how it would feel to be other than white in this country? No. Would you like to know? Yeah. Would you like to do something today that will help you know? Well, it was going to be fun. What we did in my classroom was usually fun. I said, okay, today we're going to divide people according to the color of their eyes. And because I'm blue-eyed and I didn't want the power structure to be with the majority, I said brown-eyed people are smarter than blue-eyed people. And when I said that, there sat little Debbie. I can still see her. Oh gosh, her eyes were crossed, and she didn't have her braces on her teeth yet. And she looked up at me and she said, "How come you're the teacher here if you got them blue eyes?" And I thought, well, you little.
Yeah.
Whoa, this is what this is about? Okay. And I thought, you brought this on yourself, Jane. You asked for this. Now what are you going to do? And then Alan Moss stood up in the back row and said, Debbie, if she didn't have them blue eyes, she'd be the principal or the superintendent. They're both brown-eyed. And I thought, there it is. There's my Uncle Tom. There he is. He's blue on the inside, blue on the outside, but brown on the inside. He is going to act the way he has to in order to get along with me, but also get along with them. It was absolutely terrifying. What I learned about my own racism, I watched my third graders become me because they acted the way that the important adults in their environment acted. And I watched them act the way they would. What they had learned, they learned from people like me. And I thought, this has to stop. This will not go on in my classroom. After this day is over, this will change. The way I talk, the way I act, my attitude and my behavior will change as of this moment. Yeah, it was absolutely terrifying. And I went down to the teacher's lounge at noon because too many ugly things were happening in my classroom. I watched kids who were dyslexic and who couldn't read, 4 little brown-eyed boys, read words the day they were on the top in that exercise that I knew they couldn't read, and spell words I knew they couldn't spell. And I watched it. It was just awful. And I went down to the teacher's lounge to get some help. Walked in the teacher's lounge. There were probably 10 teachers in there, including the other 2 third-grade teachers. And I told them what was happening in my classroom. When I finished, the younger of those 2 third-grade teachers, who was about 54 at the time, said, I don't know how you have time for all that extra stuff. It's all I can do to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic. Well, she hadn't taught reading, writing, and arithmetic yet. She might as well have done the extra stuff. And the other one said, and I'll never forget it as long as I live. And I can still see her sitting there. Oh. I was so angry. And she said, I don't know why you're doing that. I thought it was about time somebody shot that son of a bitch. And that's the word she used. And nobody said, do you realize what you just did? Nobody said, you could lose your job for that. Nobody said, insomuch as ye have done it unto one of these my brethren, so have ye done it unto me. Judge not that ye be. None of those good Christian people said anything. They all either smiled or laughed and nodded. And I had decided before I went to lunch that I was going to stop the exercise at noon. After I heard that, I decided that no, I'm not stopping the exercise. No person is going to leave my presence with those attitudes unchallenged. You want to make a racist remark, you make it in front of me, and you'll wish you hadn't. And you might end up wishing you had never been born. I will not tolerate it. Elie Wiesel says you must not tolerate the intolerable. He says if it's intolerable for another person, it must be intolerable for you. I will not tolerate people being mistreated because of other people's ignorance about characteristics, physical characteristics over which you have no control. I will not tolerate that. I don't have the right to. And nobody had better thank me for what I do, because what I do is what we should all be doing, if we believe in any religion at all. Any other questions that you want a short answer to?
Can we
I'll be glad to happy to give yes or no.
talk about the Christians for a moment?
Sure. Which ones?
I'm sure there's Catholic, Baptist, Lutheran, Methodist. Let's talk Christianity as a whole.
Well, let's talk Christianity as a whole. Where do you think racism came from? Do you know where it started?
The Spanish Inquisition.
During the Spanish Inquisition.
Colonizers.
When they were trying to turn everybody Catholic.
Right.
And they killed a whole bunch of people and realized that they had killed some people who were Christians. And then they realized you couldn't tell what a person's religion was by looking at them, so they had to find another way to identify those who must not be Christian. And they set upon skin color. That's where this whole thing started.
Right.
And if you look in the dictionary for the word race, and it started in France in 1580. That's when the word race, meaning a separate group of people, a certain group of people, started with Christianity. So when people say to me, good Christians don't behave that way, well, then when they say that, I have to think that good Christian is an oxymoron in many cases. Because you and I know, think about this, 300 years of the Crusades. 300 years people went around the world killing people in order to bring them to Christ. I'll bet you Jesus was just tickled to death. Now think about that. Think of what we have done in the name of religion. And then we criticize the Muslims. Make up your mind, folks. If you're going to act like one, fine. But if you can't act like one, don't call yourself one. What was your question?
I was going to ask you your thoughts of seeing the complacency of Christianity within the United States as civil rights was coming about. In a lot of my experience, I've had trouble talking with Christians about race because they use your words in a way where they say that we're all one race, the nation under God, to pass by having to talk about race.
The people who are saying, I'm not a racist because I'm a Christian, do not know where racism started. They are talking, once again, out of ignorance. And it is better to deny the truth than it is to face the truth, live with it, and then say, because it happened in the 14th century, doesn't mean that it has to happen today. But you see, one of the major differences between people of color and colorless people is when colorless people like me come into a new environment, they immediately adjust the environment to fit their needs. Look at this country, look what we've done. When people of color come into a new environment, they immediately adjust their needs to fit the environment. Now, we have done that with everything we touch, including Jesus Christ. Now, in the Bible, the Christian Bible, it says that Jesus had feet of bronze and woolly hair, right?
Yes.
Do you see many of those in churches?
I think I see the white Jesus.
Well,
in
don't
most
you though?
churches.
Don't you though? You see a Jesus that we colorless people
Yes.
will feel comfortable praying to. We take verses of our Bible, which I think is a marvelous book of stories. It's wonderful. And there's a verse in the Bible that says, "And now abideth these three: faith, hope, and charity. And the greatest of these is charity." Now, charity is selfless giving.
Yeah.
You've got to give something if you're practicing charity. We have changed that verse in the Bible too, and now abideth these three: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. Do you see the difference between charity and love? You can say, I love you, and it doesn't cost you a dime. But if you're going to show charity, and there's going to be charitable with selfless giving, that's going to cost you something. So we simply tweak the book a bit to make it more comfortable for us. Now, anybody who's listening to this is going to be furious.
Sure.
So let me warn them. Don't come to my house to shoot me. I have been threatened with death numerous times. They took me out of Pennsylvania, out of Uniontown, Pennsylvania. A bunch of black people took me out, 3 carloads of black people, rushed me out of Uniontown, Pennsylvania at midnight one night because the teachers that I had put through the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise in a very, very informal way had called the superintendent and said, if you don't get that bitch out of town, we're going to shoot her. So they got me out of town. 3 carloads of very black people, black males, got me out of town so I wouldn't get shot in Uniontown, Pennsylvania. At that time, after I realized what was going on, when I got up the next morning all alone in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and wondering who was going to shoot me when I walked out of my room in that motel, I was scared. At that time, I decided I'd never be scared again. And I am going to tell people now, you want to kill me, go ahead. My husband's gone. My oldest son is gone. My other children will be in better shape if I'm gone because they'll get what I have. So, and I don't mind. Death is not the worst thing that can happen to you. Living a useless life is worse than death. Death holds no fears for me. And I have to say this on a college campus, when I go to a college campus, there are always those 3 little boys in those red caps on which it says, make America hate again. It says great again, but it means hate again. And they're talking about me, and they're pointing their finger, they're like this. And I finally stop and I say, look, fellas, I know exactly what you're talking about. You want to see me dead. Think about this. If you kill me because of what I do to decrease the level of racism in this country, you might make a martyr out of me, and you might have to spend the rest of your lives celebrating Jane Elliott Day once a year. Now, do you want to do that? And they'll go, no, 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 no. I said, fine, now, shut up and listen while I'm talking. And they think they're home free. But by the time I'm pointing at them, all the young black males in the room are looking at them. And they know exactly who I'm talking to. Now, it's not my fault that they have been identified. All they have to do is not sit there and talk about how they want to shoot me, and then I wouldn't have to identify them, would I? You have to live with the consequences of your behavior. And I am, at my age, do I fear death? Good Lord, no. No, no. Go ahead. Have at it, fool.
You know, Jane, you said something so powerful about I'm living my life. I don't want to live a life that is not full. You know, and thinking about some of the works of Audre Lorde or James Baldwin or some of the new up-and-coming BLM activists, I think about
or any little black boy or little black girl or little Indian child who goes to school every day and knows that their teacher the first day of school is going to stand up in front of the room and say, when I see people, I don't see people as black or brown or red or yellow, I just see people as people. And she's going to leave out the word white. And they know they're going to hear that, and they know they don't have the freedom to stand up and say, do you see white folks? Teachers need to learn the things they better stop saying. Has anybody ever said to you, when I see you, I don't see you black?
a few times.
A few times, and what do you say?
I hope you see it.
Oh,
I'm proudly, I'm proudly black.
Invariably, invariably, some liberal, pale-faced female comes up to me and says, I'm colorblind, I don't see color. And I say, I knew that before you said it, because if you saw color, you wouldn't wear that shirt with those pants. And she gets absolutely furious. You don't understand what I'm saying. I say, I understand exactly what you're saying. What you're saying is, in order for you to relate to somebody, you have to deny the largest organ on their body, which is their skin, inch for inch. You can ignore the largest organ on their body in order for you to relate to them. What makes you think they want to talk to you? Well, and then they take off and get away from me just as fast as they can. And I say, come again sometime. I remember Linda Guillory, black Linda Guillory, who hired me to work for U.S. West. And a woman came up to her, and I was standing there ready to go to work the next morning. And she said to Linda Guillory, "Linda, when I see you, I don't see you black." And I thought, step back, Jane. There's going to be bloodshed here. I've got to wear this suit tomorrow. I took 2 steps back, and Linda Guillory looked down at this fool and said, "I think we should make an appointment with the optometrist. You obviously have a severe eye problem." That woman was furious. Linda was supposed to say, "Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you so much." She didn't say what she was supposed to say. I'll bet that fool never says that to a black woman again. I'll bet she doesn't. And if she does, she isn't as smart as she thinks she is. And I said, "Linda, that was beautiful." She said, "What would you say?" I said, "Well, now I'll know what to say." Because she said, "Hey, this is black, Jane." I said, "Yeah, I know."
You know, there's so many times where I feel silenced in the workplace or in professional settings because there are certain things that I feel like I'm not at liberty to say.
And as long as you feel that way, we won't solve the problem.
As long as I feel that way.
As long as you feel that way, and as long as you go along to get along, that proves that we must be right or you'd spite it. So you must enjoy being where you are.
Or people have died for less.
Well, yes, well, it's worse to live a useless life than it is to die. If I stopped because of every time I've been threatened with death or all the ugly, ugly letters I got after the Johnny Carson show, it was 1/3 of those letters were so vicious and so ugly and so nasty I couldn't show them my students. No way I could show my students those letters. If I had stopped then, you wouldn't be here talking to me. Period. You know it and I know it. I wasn't about to be stopped by ignorant people who think they could intimidate me into shutting up and keep me from telling the truth. It says in the Bible, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set ye free. I would love to be free of racism. It's an expensive project. It's a killer. It kills people every day, and it kills people's initiative, and it kills people's right to have good friends who are different from themselves, and it lessens our creativity. It lessens our human relationships. It's a mental illness. It isn't a mental illness. We choose it. We could choose to refuse to accept this nonsense. When our kid comes home from school and says, "White people," that mother has to say, "Wait just a minute, there are no white people. Let me show you something, my son," and put his hand on a piece of paper and say, "Does your hand match this paper? Because if it doesn't, it ain't white." And a black mother has the right to say to her child, "Come with me," and put their hand against that shirt. Does your skin match your shirt? Then if it doesn't, it ain't black. Your shirt is black. You know it, and so do I. This is white. This is not. We've got to get over the idea of the rightness of whiteness and the badness of blackness. And the only reason we do that by stop using those 2 words to describe or to identify human beings. Human beings do not come in black and white. Skunks do, cattle do, dogs, cats, fish.
Right.
Lots of animals come in black and white. Humans come in shades of brown. Get the National Geographic magazine for April of 2018 and then try to argue with me about that. Okay?
Okay.
Ezra, okay.
Just nod and smile. No, this whole thing is, why, and this is 2021. Why are we still talking about something that isn't true?
It's profitable.
It's more than that. It's more than profitable.
Yeah.
It's because some of us, our self-image depends on having somebody to look down on. And so, as long as my skin is all right, I must be fine. And I'm certainly better than a large percentage of the rest of the population of the United States, which makes no sense at all. I want it stopped. So take care of that.
I'll do my best in my lifetime. You know, before we had actually started taping, you were just like, I love this work, I'm tired. You're speaking to a newer generation now of people who are saying that
You can't get tired.
they're tired.
You don't have the right to get tired. Your mother didn't get tired. Your grandmother didn't get tired. Your great-grandmother didn't get tired.
Sure did.
They fought every day and every night. And that's the reason you are here, is because they had the courage to say to themselves, not only am I going to live, I am going to produce somebody else like me, and they are going to live, because this is a good thing for this country to have this kind of person in it. You do not understand, you do not realize how fantastic those original people were of whom you are a descendant, because we haven't learned about the wonderful things they did. We learned about all the wonderful things the white males did. Number one, there are no white males. Number two, there would be no males without females. So let's start telling the truth, and let's start saying to people, here's the way it is, folks. Males can't reproduce. Men should be concerned, because we know that you can put two female cells together in a petri dish, break down the cell wall, and come up with another female mammal. They've done it. Would you like to have a society without men? No. Men are some of the most fun things to watch. Some of my best friends are male.
Oh, my goodness.
And I had a husband for 60 years. And you don't really realize how valuable they are till you don't have them anymore. But you need to realize that I don't think you know of a male who reproduced. And if we had a population explosion, we could stop it by simply having one male have a baby. Then there wouldn't be another one, because that's hard work, and that's painful. Yeah, is not what it's about. It's hard work, and it's painful, and it's not something men are strong enough to do. They aren't allowed to do that. We are allowed to do that, and that makes us very special. Whether or not you realize it, it makes us very special. Without us, there's nothing. It's the end. So, black women who call themselves black women, think about this. Black and brown women won the presidency for Joe Biden. They saved us from losing, they kept us from losing our democracy. They went to the polls in huge numbers, even though they were told that they shouldn't go and they didn't have the right to go. And now we're writing laws in Iowa to prevent those people from voting in such numbers. Iowa is doing that, and so are at least 40 of the other states of the United States of America, limiting voting rights. Because women came out in huge numbers and said, this is not going to go on. We are going to put a stop to this, and they did. We owe our democracy right now to brown and black women. Make no mistake about that. That's what happened. It's what's going on. I owe you a great deal. I owe you two women, and people like you a great deal. You don't have to thank me for anything. I have to thank you for what you and people like you did last November.
There was something about last November, that whole year, it let me think about what was important to me.
Yeah.
To me, it was more than an election.
Yep.
It was bigger than COVID-19. It was bigger than all of us having to grapple with watching a murder on television. It was really the breakdown of us telling each other that it was okay for so long and lying to each other that it was okay.
I was born the year Adolf Hitler came to power, so that I watched my father reacting to what Hitler was doing all those years. So that when I am this age and I watch a man running for the presidency who has in his bedside table in a locked drawer the writings of Adolf Hitler, the New World Order, and I watch him begin to run this country the way I watched Adolf Hitler run Germany. Now, though what happened on January 6th, young people saw that, and 40 years down the road, when they see somebody coming up who will create that same kind of situation, they're going to say to themselves, as I have said to myself for the last 4 years, we've been through this before, we aren't going to let this happen again. That's what's important about January 6th, and that's what's important about George Floyd. Those young people saw that happen. Those young white people saw that happen, and now they are saying, we saw it happen. with George Floyd. We're not going to let this happen again. They're going to remember that, they're going to react to it, and they're going to stop it when they see it happening. I think that is what makes January 6th extremely important. When you get to be 60 years old, 80 years old, and somebody, it looks as though it's happening again, you're going to say, get out in the street, I'm going out in the street, we're going to put a stop to this, and we're going to do it now. We've been through this before, we know how to stop it, and we're going to stop it. I think that that's the value of George Floyd and the value of January 6th.
Thank you, Jane. You know, Hillary, I'm going to check in with you for questions. Do we have any from the audience that are most pressing?
You know, we don't have a lot of questions. We have just a lot of commentary. Everybody wants a book list. There's been a lot of recommendations, so we'll get a book list.
Oh, the book list.
Yeah.
Website. It's on her website.
Yeah, go to my website, Jane at janeelliott.com. Here, people are going to say after this is over, you brought us a lot of problems, you didn't bring us any solutions. I've got a solution. Go to my website, Jane at janeelliott.com, download the printed learning materials. The first page, the first set is a set of typical statements that white folks make that they aren't racist. They should read the first one and then read the clarification of that statement. How many times has somebody said, I'm not racist, some of my best friends are black. Oh, then read the clarification of that one, and you won't say that one again. There's 24 statements there that will tell you, it tells you how that is received by the person who hears it. And then you wipe that out of your vocabulary, and it's time to do that. The second page, the first is the commitments, no. First is the typical statements, then the clarifications, then there's a set of commitments to combat racism. 18 things you can do in your own environment to deal with your own racism. And now somebody's saying, well, racism is a societal problem. People, societies are made up of individuals. And if enough individuals say, no more, we can put a stop to this. That's all it takes, is enough individuals to say, no more. Incidentally, and the last page is a bibliography. Read everything under racism on that bibliography. And then you'll come away knowing more than you did when I started to run my mouth. You have to realize that the kids who are in that blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise in the film, The Eye of the Storm, everybody look at the film, The Eye of the Storm, and look at what happens to little white kids when they are treated for a day the way we treat children of color for a lifetime. And then say to yourself, is that really what I want to be a part of? And then I'll remember my father, the first film that was made in my classroom was made by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation the second year I did the exercise. And they sent me a copy of that film, and I took it up to the hotel where my folks owned, and I showed it to my mother and my father, just the three of us. And when it was over, my 59-year-old father, who had 7 children, lost one, was 59 years old, had farmed all his life, stood up, took his red handkerchief out of the back pocket of his bib overalls, blew his nose, wiped his eyes, and said, I wish somebody had taught me that when I was 9 years old. He watched little third-grade white kids going through an exercise in which they were treated unfairly on the basis of a physical characteristic over which they had no control for one day. And they learned so much, and he learned so much watching that he wished somebody had taught him that when he was 9 years old. And I have never known a more moral man than my father. But that was a morality that had never been instilled in him. And after that, he would not listen to a black joke. He wouldn't laugh at one, and he'd give you that Lloyd Jennison look and say, you're going to tell that? Because if you are, I'll be in the other room. And he'd get up and walk out. He wouldn't put up with it, because he watched those poor little white children be treated for one day. And it was only a 30-minute film. So he saw 30 minutes of 2 days, and that was enough for him to say, never again. There's something very wrong. Changed his attitude toward the whole thing.
Jane, I think we have a question from the audience.
I do. I have a comment about someone whose teacher in Scheller, Iowa, did this exercise in 1977, and they've never forgotten your work and appreciate you so much. But this question is a terrific question.
Did she go through the exercise?
Yes. Yes. This is from Jason. I would love to know Jane's thoughts on trans people of color and how to do an exercise like her original one to make the point that all people are people who matter.
That all people are what?
Are people who matter.
All people are people who matter, absolutely. All people
and
are.
How to educate kind of around trans.
But But you have to tell that person the reason all people are people who matter is because if every one of us would trace our DNA back as far as we could, we would find that part of our DNA came from Africa. So when we say Black Lives Matter, what we're saying is every human being on the face of the earth came from what we call black lives. Come on, folks. We're all African Americans or Afro-Japanese or Afro-British or Afro-Dutch. We all came from the same place. So quit fighting it, folks. Quit saying, people say, well, Black Lives Matter. That means that the rest of us don't. Black Lives Matter, the people who did Black Lives Matter, they could have kept white people from weaponizing that if they had simply said, Black Lives Matter, comma, 2. All they had to do was write Black Lives Matter, 2. And then white people couldn't have said, well, what about us? No, 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 no. This means all of us. Black Lives Matter, 2. That means you matter and we matter, too. But they didn't. A whole lot of people of color don't really understand how to deal with white people. They have been dealing with them in such a defensive position for so long that they don't know how to read their little minds. And some of our little minds are very little. I'm sorry, but that's the way we are. We haven't ever had to really think. We really, if you're born all right because you're white, you don't really have to think. And you don't really have to make a huge effort to get what you want out of life. And now but somebody's going to say, I had to work to go to college and look what I... Yeah, well, your father wasn't threatened with going to prison because of the ignorance of somebody who saw the color of his skin. Your mother wasn't forced to do this kind of labor because she couldn't be hired to do anything else because in that neighborhood, you weren't allowed to hire a black person. Your father wasn't a manager of a supermarket in a black section of a city where he wasn't allowed to hire more than one black employee. Don't tell me that you've had the same experience that a black person has. Do not tell me that. Do not sit there in that chair and say, well, I've suffered too. Look at what I've had to go through. Do not do it because, number one, you were not called a slave, and your background was not totally denied. You didn't have to say, Columbus discovered America, knowing full well that people from Africa discovered this continent between 20,000 and 10,000 years before Columbus was a gleam in his father's eye.
Right.
You didn't have to do that because you were told that you originated in the Caucasus Mountain regions, and that's why you're called Caucasian.
Right.
And that, too, is a lie.
You spoke earlier about ideas of blackness and whiteness coming from 15th century ideals and the process of unlearning those ideas. And much to the person, Jason, who had asked the question, I think the idea of transness that comes in if you're talking about it comes with this idea of, as we're learning about race, we understand that these are constructs that have been used to control people from the 15th century, so we have to unlearn those in the same way that we have learned about gender. And so it's unlearning the things that people have talked about in binaries of man and woman. So I just wanted to add that point. But
you want to be careful about that. We base all our other isms on how we treat people of color, particularly blacks. That is the model for how we treat all people.
yeah,
I have worked with a bunch of people who were black and trans and gay and lesbian and all right. The main part of their being and the main place where they get the abuse is on skin color. So until we solve the problem of racism, we are not going to solve the problem of gender or gender orientation or religion or age or any of the rest of these because we use racism as the model for how we can treat everybody else.
that's right.
Now, when we all get together and say, all right, now here's the way it is. We're going to set aside our anger. As a white woman, I have to say, I'm going to forget about the fact that I'm female and fight over that, and I'm going to fight over the fact that that black woman is also female, and she will never get to say what I'm saying because she'd be killed if she said what I say. If I had been a black woman in that community and had put those kids through that exercise, I would have lost my job and I might have lost my life. Skin color And the way we treat people of color is the model that we use for how we treat all those others who are different. And I know that we've got all kinds of problems with gender and gender orientation, the way people feel about those things. And that's another thing that we religious people have put in place. We need to, we won't go into that because that makes me really angry.
Breakfast tomorrow.
Breakfast tomorrow,
Yeah.
tomorrow, and I hope you like it because I ate it and it was pretty good. Any other questions?
I think that's all I have. You have a lot of accolades coming in. I can feel them. So Hillary is just beaming over there.
Well, you're going to get some really ugly statements made, and don't tell them where I live
You got it.
because I don't need to have them throwing things on my yard. And that's the interesting part about Riceville. No matter how strange some of those people regarded me, not one of them ever said anything or did anything to me personally. They abused my children, so I got my children out. But they never abused me, and I got hired every year. And when they asked the superintendent, people who interviewed him for newspaper articles, why didn't you fire her? He said, because I knew she was right, and how could I fire her for doing the right thing? Now, that's not something he told the people in Riceville. He just told it to the people who were writing the newspaper articles. Because I had good superintendents and good principals while I was teaching there. And they knew that I was right. And when I was in high school, all the male teachers were veterans from the Second World War. And one of them stood up in class one day, and I'll never forget it as long as I live. He said, I'll never fight in another old men's war, and neither will any of my sons. And I thought, that's unpatriotic. And I told my dad, and he said, he's absolutely right. That's exactly what these wars are. They are old men's wars put together so that somebody can make money off them. He said, that's all these wars are about, is how to increase our economy. And I thought, oh my God, Franklin Roosevelt, my hero. Scary, scary. All right, are we?
I think we're
You have one more?
One more question.
one more. Okay.
Can Jane speak to the correlation of the generational burden of racism and hopelessness?
What did she say?
Can you speak to the
Correlation of generational burden and rate of racism and hopelessness.
Hopelessness?
and
The correlation.
Wait a minute. Look at you two people. Is it hopeless? Where are you?
well, hang on. I think so. There was another part to it. What are your thoughts on the hopelessness and the generational burden of racism?
Can Jane speak to the correlation of the generational burden of racism and hopelessness? Well, I could if I hadn't read things like Whitney Young's Beyond Racism, who was exposed to racism all his life and still wrote a book full of hope. I could if I hadn't read the Bible, which is written by and about and for people of color. Jesus was not a white male, he was an Ethiopian Jew. Now think about that. I could think that hopelessness, that the correlation between racism and hopelessness, what it has done for a huge number of black people, people of color, Native American people, are still alive because they refuse to give up hope. They refuse to descend to the level at which white people want them to be. They refuse to do that. When I see the kinds of progress that individual people of color make in spite of all the crap that's done to them, I think, what is it? What is the X factor in those people that many people who look like me don't have? I don't see that as hopelessness. I see that as you can try to put me down, but I'm gonna keep on going, and you're gonna have to deal with me when I come back. When they were gonna send me, they had a junior high teacher retired, and I went to the superintendent and said, I'd like to have that job. And he said, well, you're the one we wanted to send, but you've got too many years seniority, but if you'll take it, we'll send you. I said, I want that job. So the janitor went up to the junior high kids and said, Mrs. Elliott's going to be the teacher up here next year. And they said to him, you tell her when she comes up those stairs, we're going to throw her out. When she comes up here, we're going to throw her out the second-story window. So he came back and told me that. Now, I should have descended into hopelessness. But instead I said, you go back and tell them they're going to have to figure out what they're going to do with me when I come back up those stairs. And he went back and told them that, and they said, oh, she will too. We'll have to find out something else to do. So what did they do? They turned into little angels when they came into my classroom, because they knew what I expected, and I knew what I thought of them, and I thought they were all wonderful because I'd had a third of them in third grade. And that's something else that's interesting about this. A third of the students in the Riceville school from 3, 4, 5, and 6, those 4 grades, went through the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. Several years after we had done that exercise, a professor from the University of Northern Iowa came to Riceville and did an attitudinal survey with the kids in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade about their attitude toward race. And they did the same survey with the kids in the St. Ansgar School, which is almost identical to Riceville. When they compiled their results, what they found out was that the kids who were in the Riceville school, the kids who had been in my classroom, were less racist in their attitudes as expressed on this survey than all the other kids in the school. They also found out that all the kids in the Riceville school were less racist in their attitudes as expressed on this survey than were the kids in the St. Ansgar school. And the professor said, what this says is, if we could convince a third of the students in any school, we could change the school completely. He said, your students have changed the behaviors and attitudes of their peer group. He said, their behaviors and attitudes are rubbing off on their peers. He said, that's what makes this an extremely valuable experience.
Jane.
Yeah, now if
Thank
we could,
you.
yeah, if we could change, if we could change a third of the people in law school, in the legislature, we might even be able to change, what's her name, Marjorie Taylor Greene. We might even be able to change her attitude. We might even be able to change our 2 senators' attitudes toward people who are different from themselves. We might be able to change our House of Representatives if we could get a third of them to realize that when you treat somebody, if you don't want to be treated the way they're treated, stop treating them that way. If you don't want them to be angry at you, don't do something to make them angry. Do not treat others the way you want to be treated. Treat others the way they want to be treated. Believe in the platinum rule instead of the golden rule. The platinum rule says, do unto others as others would have you do unto them. Not do unto others as you would have others do unto you. I don't have the right to treat people the way I want to be treated. I have to treat people the way they want to be treated. And you know and I know that very, very few white people would want to be treated the way we treat our citizens of color. The most segregated hour in the week is Sunday morning. Read this book, and I'll tell you what pages to read.
Okay, folks, Jane is holding up The Color of Law.
The Color of Law. Read. Just a minute, I'll find them because there are a couple of pages in here. Here they are. Pages 216 and 217 in The Color of Law. If the government had declined to build racially separate public housing in cities where segregation hadn't previously taken root, and instead had scattered integrated developments throughout the community, those cities might have developed in a less racially toxic fashion with fewer desperate ghettos and more diverse suburbs. Did that ever occur to you? If churches, universities, and hospitals had faced loss of tax-exempt status for their promotion of restrictive covenants, they most likely would have refrained from such activity. Just read pages 216 and 217 in the book, The Color of Law. And then choose your representatives and your senators more carefully, and choose your lawyers more carefully. And ask your lawyers if they've read the book, The Color of Law. Is that too much to ask?
Not for me.
Not for me, but then I'm not a lawyer. Okay?
You know what, Jane? I could be here all night in this building having this convo.
You could listen all night because I
could.
don't allow you to talk. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
But you know what?
You ask me a question, then I give you the answer, and you're going to have all kinds of problems because of my answers. But you aren't responsible for what I say, and you aren't responsible for what I say. So don't let somebody say to you, well, if you hadn't had that witch on, you'll say, wait, you really used the wrong word. The word witch begins with B where she's concerned, and it stands for being in total control, honey. You try to slow her down.
You know what? On that note, folks, we have Jane Elliott. Folks, we also have Ezra Krivalavi, and this has been quite a treat to have this roundtable discussion or listening session. I was here for all of it, and truly the speaker series is about the speaker. It's about you. So there weren't too many questions that I had because we did our research. We knew you were going to roll.
Oh, I see.
We knew you were going to roll. And so, that was one thing we were really excited about. So, it was an absolute honor to just be here and have the conversation that link from the past to the present. And you're talking to a newer generation of folks who still have their hope intact.
But you have to realize what an honor it is for an old, pale-faced woman to have young people of color interested in what she has to say. I think that the fact that you and I can have a conversation without having a fight says something about what the problem is.
Right.
And the problem is not skin color. The problem is willingness to listen. And it's a good thing you were, because I'm not.
You know what, folks, we could keep going, but we're going to have to wrap this. You know what, Darren, thank you so much for running tech. Hillary, thank you so much for answering the questions. Thank you, Ezra, for being here. And thank you, F&G, for sponsoring the speaker series for this 2021 year. It's been a very special year for many reasons. The speaker series have really kept me going. It's been an honor to serve and be able to listen and have this moment together with you all. And as a few reminders, please stay tuned for the following events that we have for 30 Days of Pride with Capital City Pride. So check out capitalcitypride.org for more events. And stay tuned and have a thought-provoking and happy Pride Month. Signing off, Destiny Woodruss.